so interested in. In fact, I bought a book that I am actually going to start reading over on my Patreon this week. Well, Wednesday. Hopefully. We've been having some filming issues, so sorry guys. I'm gonna get to you, I promise. But I bought this book, The Trial of Lizzie Borden, and it is about a woman that started researching the Borden case in 1990 and wrote a book about it. It's filled with pictures and like the whole trial, and I'm so excited to read it. But I knew I couldn't read it on my Patreon without covering the case here on my channel. And I chose it for the finale because some of you may or may not know there's a little bit of a supernatural aspect to this case. Many of you probably don't believe in ghosts or specters or whatever you want to call them, but I do. And I believe that the Borden house is haunted. I haven't been there, but I want to. Anyway, we're gonna start, and I'm just gonna tell you all about the Lizzie Borden case. Has anyone watched the movie with Christina Ricci? Because I need to know if it's good before I rent it. Side note. Okay, let me get to my document here. The August afternoon was unbearably hot, even for Massachusetts. In fact, the temperature had climbed to well over 100 degrees, even though it was not yet noon. The old man, still in his heavy morning coat, was not feeling well, and he reclined on the mohair-covered sofa in the parlor. He leaned back so his boots were resting on the floor and not soiling the upholstery of the couch. In a short time, he drifted off to sleep, never suspecting that he would not awaken. He also did not suspect that above his head, his wife was bleeding on the floor of the upstairs guest room. She had been dead for nearly 2 hours, and in a few moments the same hand that took her life would take his as well. And even if he knew those things by way of some premonition, he might never guess that his murderer would never be brought to justice. The case of Lizzie Borden has fascinated those with an interest in American history, crime really, for well over a century. There have been a few, or very few, cases that have attracted as much attention as the hatchet murders of Andrew Borden and his wife, Abby. This is partly because of the gruesomeness of the crime, but also because of the unexpected character of the accused. Lizzie Borden was not a slavering maniac, but a demure, respectable spinster Sunday school teacher. Because of this, the entire town was shocked when she was charged with the murder of her father and stepmother. And the fact that she was found to be not guilty of these murders, leaving the case to be pretty much forever unsolved, only adds to the mystique and fans the flame of, well, my continuing obsession with this mystery. Andrew Jackson Borden was one of the leading citizens of Fall River, Massachusetts, a prosperous mill town and seaport. The Borden family had strong roots in the community, and they had been among the most influential citizens of the region for decades. At the age of 70, Andrew was certainly one of the richest men in the city. He was a director on the board of several banks and a commercial landlord with considerable holdings. He was described as a tall, thin, and dour man, and he was known Andrew lived with his second wife, Abby Durfee Gray. Sorry if you can hear my tummy. And his daughters from his first marriage, Emma and Lizzie, in a 2.5-story frame house. It was located in what was described as the unfashionable part of town, but it was close to his business interests. Both of Andrew's daughters felt like this house was beneath their station in life, and they begged their father to move to a nicer place. But Andrew's frugal nature had never allowed him to even consider this a possibility. In spite of this and his conservative daily life, Andrew was said to be moderately generous with both of his daughters. The events that would lead to the tragedy began on Thursday, August 4th, 1892. The Borden household was up early that morning, as usual. Emma was not at home, having gone to visit friends in the nearby town of Fairhaven. But the girls' Uncle John had arrived the day before for an unannounced visit. John Morse, the brother of Andrew Borden's first wife, was a regular guest in the Borden household. He traveled from Dartmouth, Massachusetts, several times a year to visit the family and conduct business in town. The first person awake in the house that morning was Bridget Sullivan, the maid. Bridget was a respectable Irish girl who Emma and Lizzie both rudely insisted on calling Maggie, which I didn't know. I thought maybe she just went by Maggie, but apparently Maggie was the name of the previous girl that had worked for them, so they couldn't even be bothered to learn her name. It's terrible. At the time of the murders, Bridget was 26, and she'd been in the Borden household since 1889. There's nothing to say that she was anything but an exemplary young woman who'd come to America from Ireland in 1886. She did not stay in the house the night following the murders, but she did come back on Friday night to her third-floor room. On Saturday, she left, never to return again. So, again, Bridget came downstairs from her attic room around 6 to build a fire in the kitchen and begin cooking breakfast. An hour later, John and Mr. and Mrs. Borden came down to eat. They lingered in conversation around the table for nearly an hour. Lizzie slept late and she did not join them for breakfast. At a little before 8 a.m., John left the house to go and visit a niece and nephew, and Andrew locked the screen door after him. It was a peculiar custom in the house to always keep the door locked. Do you guys do that? I do, but Sean doesn't. Even the doors in certain rooms upstairs in the Borden household were usually kept locked. A few minutes after John left, Lizzie came downstairs but said that she wasn't hungry. She had a coffee and a cookie, but nothing else. It's possible she had a touch of the stomach bug that was going through the household. Bridget later stated that she felt the need to go outside and throw up during breakfast, or sometime after breakfast. 2 days before, Mr. and Mrs. Borden had been ill during the night, and they had both thrown up several times. It has been assumed that this may have been food poisoning, as no one else in the family was affected. It may have been the onset of the flu, or it may have been something far more sinister. At 9:15, Andrew Borden left the house and went downtown. Abby Borden went upstairs to make the bed in the guest room that John had been staying in. She asked Bridget to wash the windows. At 9:30, she came downstairs Mrs. Borden had gone out, she had a note from someone who was sick. Lizzie and Emma always called their stepmother Mrs. Borden, and recently the relationship between the three of them, especially between Abby and Lizzie, was especially strained. Andrew took the key to his bedroom off a shelf and went back upstairs. Their bedroom could only be reached by this set of stairs, as there was no hallway, and the front stairs only gave access to Lizzie's room, and you had to go through Lizzie's room to get to Emma's room and the guest room. There were connecting doors between the elder Borden's rooms and Lizzie's room, but they were usually kept locked. The layout of this house is a little strange. I'm not actually sure if Emma's room was supposed to be a bedroom or if it was supposed to be like, they had like sitting rooms or like dressing rooms, and I think maybe they made it into a bedroom to have the guest room not be accessible from Lizzie's bedroom, if that makes sense. Anyway, Andrew stayed upstairs for only a few minutes before he came back down and settled on the sofa in the in the sitting room. Lizzie began to heat up an iron to press some handkerchiefs. She said, "Are you going out this afternoon, Maggie?" she asked Bridget. "There's a cheap sale of dress goods at Sargent's this afternoon at 8 cents a yard." Bridget replied that she was not. The heat of the morning, combined with the window washing and her touch of a stomach ailment, had left her feeling poorly, and she went back up the back stairs to her attic room for a nap. This was a few minutes before 11, and she was awakened a few minutes later by a cry from downstairs. "Maggie, come down," Lizzie shouted from the bottom of the back stairs, and Bridget's eyes fluttered open. She had drifted off into a restless sleep, but the urgency of Lizzie's cries startled her awake. Bridget replied in a flustered voice, asking what was wrong. "Come down, quick," Lizzie wailed. "Father's dead. Someone's come in and killed him." She ordered Bridget to go upstairs and check, but the maid refused to go alone. Mrs. Churchill offered to go with her. They went up the staircase together, but Mrs. Churchill was the first to see Abby lying on the floor of the guest room. She was laying in a pool of blood, and Mrs. Churchill later said she had been so savagely attacked that she only looked like the form of a person. Dr. Bowen found that Mrs. Borden had been struck more than a dozen times. From the back, the autopsy later revealed that there had been 19 blows to her head, probably from the same hatchet that had killed Mr. Borden. The blood on Mrs. Borden's body was dark and congealed, leading him to believe that she had been killed before Andrew. Dr. Bowen was heavily involved in the activities of the Borden house on the day of the murder. He was the first to examine the bodies. He sent a telegram to Emma to summon her home. He assisted Dr. Dolan with the autopsies and even prescribed a calming tranquilizer for Lizzie. He was a constant presence in the house, and an involvement with them, especially on August 4th, has led to him being considered a major figure on some of the conspiracies that developed in this case. A call reached the Fall River Police Station at 11:15 a.m. But as things would happen, that day marked the annual picnic of the Fall River Police Department, and most of them were off enjoying an outing at Rocky Point. The only officer dispatched to the house was Officer George W. Allen. He ran to the house, saw that Andrew was dead, and ran back to the station house to inform the city marshal of the events. He left no one in charge of the crime scene, and while he was gone, neighbors overran the Borden house, comforting Lizzie, peering at the gruesome state of Andrew Borden's body. The constant traffic trampled and destroyed pretty much any clues that may have been left behind. During the half hour or so that no authorities were on the scene, a county medical examiner named Dr. Dolan passed by the house just by chance. He looked in, and he was pressed into service by Dr. Bowen. Dolan examined the bodies, and after hearing that the family was sick and the milk was suspected, he took samples of it. Later that afternoon, he had the bodies photographed and removed the stomachs and sent them, along with the milk, to the Harvard Medical School for analysis. But no poison was ever found. The murder investigation that followed was pretty chaotic. The police were reluctant to suspect Lizzie of the murder, as it was against the perceived social understanding of the era that a woman such as she could possibly have committed such a hideous crime. Other solutions were advanced, but were discarded as even more improbable. A profusion of clues were discovered over the next few days, all of which led nowhere. A boy reported seeing a man jump over the back fence of the Borden property, and while a man was found matching the boy's description, he had an unbreakable alibi. A bloody hatchet also posed another problem for investigators. According to Lizzie, she'd gone out, but obviously she hadn't. The note that Lizzie said Abby had received asking her to visit a sick friend was never recovered. Lizzie later said that she may have inadvertently thrown it away. When Andrew Borden returned to the house, Bridget had let him in as the screen door was fastened on the inside, with 3 locks. This would have made it extremely difficult for a killer to get in the house. A small window of opportunity would have existed, though, while Bridget was fetching a pail and water from the barn. In addition, Bridget later testified that while she was unlocking the door for Mr. Borden, she heard Lizzie laugh from upstairs. However, Lizzie swore she had been in the kitchen when her father had come home. Andrew also had to retrieve the key from his bedroom on the shelf in the kitchen to get to his room. This was done as a precaution because of a burglary the family had had the year before. In June of 1891, a police captain inspected the house after Andrew reported a crime. His desk had been rummaged through, and $100 and a watch and a chain had been taken. There was no clue as to how anyone had gotten in the house, although Lizzie offered the fact that the cellar door had been open. The neighborhood was canvassed, but no one was reported to see a stranger in the vicinity. According to the police captain, Andrew said several times to him, "I am afraid that the police will not be able to find the real thief." It is unknown what he may have meant by this, but various conspiracy theorists have their own ideas. On the afternoon of the murder, 4 hatchets were discovered in the basement of the house, including one with dried blood and hair on it, later determined to be from a cow. Another one of the hatchets was rusted, and the others was covered in dust. One of these was without a handle and was covered in ashes. The broken handle appeared to be recent, so it was taken into evidence. Sergeant Harrington and another officer asked Lizzie where she'd been that morning, and she said that she'd been in the barn loft looking for iron for fishing sinkers. The 2 men examined the barn and found the loft floor to be thick with dust, with no evidence that anyone had been up there. Marshal John Fleet questioned Lizzie and asked her who may have committed these murders. Other than an unknown man with whom her father had gotten in an argument with a few weeks before, she could think of no one. When she was asked directly if Uncle John or Bridget could have killed her father and stepmother, she said that they couldn't have. John had left the house before 9, and Bridget had been sleeping when Andrew had been killed. Lizzie pointedly reminded Deputy Marshal Fleet that Abby was not her mother, but her stepmother. She didn't like Abby to be called her mother. On August 5th, the investigation continued, the day after the murders, but by now the story had appeared in newspapers and the entire town was in an absolute uproar. Sergeant Harrington found Eli Pence at the drugstore and interviewed him about Lizzie's attempt to buy poison. Emma engaged Mr. Andrew Jennings as their family attorney. The police continued to investigate, but nothing of significance was found. On August 6th, the funerals of the Bordens took place on Saturday. The service was conducted by Reverends Buck and Judd from the 2 congregational churches. The bodies were not buried at this time. The police arrived and removed the bodies for yet another autopsy. The heads of the Bordens were removed from the bodies, and plaster casts were made of their skulls. For some reason, Mr. Borden's head was not returned to his coffin, which I found so weird and creepy. On August 7th, Sunday morning, Alice Russell observed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove. She told Lizzie, "If I Massachusetts. In effect, a trial was being conducted before the grand jury. Many saw this as a chance that the charges against Lizzie would be dismissed. Then on December 1st, Alice Russell again testified about the burning of the dress. The very next day, Lizzie was charged with 3 counts of murder. Strangely, she had been charged for the murder of her father, the murder of her stepmother, and then the murder of both of them. The trial was scheduled to begin on June 5th, 1893. The trial itself lasted 14 days, and news of it filled the front pages of every major newspaper in the country. Between 30 and 40 reporters from the Boston and New York papers and wire services were in the courtroom every day. The trial began June 5th, and after a day to select the jury, which consisted of 12 middle-aged farmers and tradesmen, the prosecution spent the next 7 days putting on its case. Jose Knowlton was the reluctant prosecutor in this case. He had been forced into the role by Arthur Pillsbury, Attorney General of Massachusetts, who should have been the principal attorney for the prosecution. However, as Lizzie's trial date approached, Pillsbury felt pressure building from Lizzie's supporters, particularly women's groups and religious organizations. Being that he was worried about the next election, he directed Knowlton, who was the district attorney in Fall River, to lead the prosecution in his place. He also assigned William Moody, district attorney of Essex County, to assist him. Moody made the opening statements for the prosecution. He presented 3 arguments. First, that Lizzie was predisposed to murder her father and stepmother because of their animosity towards one another. Second, that she planned the murder and carried it out. Third, that her behavior and contradictory testimony after the fact was not that of an innocent person. Moody did an excellent job, and many have regarded him as the most competent attorney involved in this case. At one point, he threw a dress onto the prosecution table that he planned to admit as evidence. As he did so, the tissue paper that was covering the skull of Andrew Borden lifted and fluttered away. Dramatically, Lizzie slid to the floor in a dead faint. Crucial to the prosecution in the case was evidence that supplied a motive for Lizzie to commit these murders. This was done by using a number of witnesses who testified to Lizzie's dislike of her stepmother and her complaints of her father's spendthrift ways. The prosecution also tried to establish that Andrew was writing a new will that would leave Emma and Lizzie with a pittance, and Abby with a huge portion of his estate. One of the witnesses that was called to establish this was John Morse, who first said that Andrew had discussed a new will with him, and then later said that he had never told him anything about it. The prosecution then turned Lizzie's predisposition towards murder and her strange behavior before and after the events. They again called Alice Russell to testify about the burning of the dress. The destruction of it seemed a possible answer as to why Lizzie was not covered in blood after killing her father and stepmother. It was highly probable that she would have been spattered with it if she did commit the murders, right? In later years, some people have theorized that maybe she wore a smock over her dress, or perhaps even had no clothes on. However, the smock would have also been bloody and would have had to have been disposed of. In Victorian society of Fall River, a young woman would have never appeared nude in front of her father, even if she was going to kill him. resumed, the three-judge panel excluded Lizzie's contradictory inquest testimony. On Wednesday, June 4th, the prosecution called Eli Pence, the drugstore clerk, to the stand. The defense objected to his testimony as irrelevant and prejudicial. The judges sustained that the objection and Lizzie's attempt to buy poison was thrown out of the record. The prosecution called several medical witnesses, including Dr. Dolan. One of them even produced the skull of Andrew to show how the blows had been struck. Unfortunately for the prosecution, these witnesses had an adverse effect on the case as the defense used their testimonies to strike points in Lizzie's favor. They were forced to state that whomever had committed the murders would have been covered in blood. There was no witness to say that any blood had ever been found on Lizzie. Lizzie Borden's defense counsel used only 2 days to present its case. For the most part, the defense offered witnesses who could either corroborate Lizzie's story or who could provide alternate possibilities as to who the killer may be. The testimony of the various witnesses was meant to do little but provide reasonable doubt about Lizzie's guilt. For instance, an ice cream peddler testified to seeing a woman, presumably Lizzie, coming out of the barn. This bolstered her story that she'd actually been in there. A passerby claimed to see a wild-eyed man around the time of the murders. Mr. Joseph LeMay claimed he was walking deep in the woods, some miles from the city, about 12 days after the murders, when he heard someone crying, "Poor Mrs. Borden. Poor Mrs. Borden." He said that he looked over a wall and saw a man on the ground. The man had bloodstains on his shirt. He picked up a hatchet and shook it at him, and then disappeared into the woods. The defense also called witnesses who claimed to see a mysterious young man in the vicinity of the Borden house who was never properly explained. They also called Emma to dispute the suggestion that Lizzie had any motive to want to kill their parents. On Monday, June 19th, Robinson delivered his closing arguments, and Knowlton began his closing arguments for the prosecution. He completed them the following day. The judges then asked Lizzie if she had anything to say for herself, and she spoke for the only time during the trial. She said, "I am innocent. I leave it to my counsel to speak for me." Instructions were then given to the jury, and they left to deliberate over the verdict. A little over an hour later, the jury returned with its verdict. Lizzie Borden was found not guilty on all 3 charges. Public opinion was, by this time, of the feeling that the police and the courts had persecuted Lizzie long enough. 5 weeks after the trial, Lizzie, who henceforth called herself Lizbeth, and Emma purchased and moved into a 13-room stone house at 306 Fringe Street in Fall River. It was located on the Hill, the most fashionable area of the city. Lizzie named the house Maplecroft and had its name carved into the top step leading to the front door. In 1904, Lizzie met a young actress, Nance O'Neill, and for the next 2 years, they were inseparable. About this time, Emma separated from her sister and moved to Fairhaven. She and Lizzie stopped speaking to one another. Rumors said that the sensational revelations about the murders would follow the split, but the revelations never came. Emma stayed with the family of Reverend Buck, and sometime around 1915, she moved to Newmarket, New Hampshire. Lizzie died June 1st, 1927, at the age of 67, after a long illness from complications following gallbladder surgery. Emma died 9 days later as a result of a fall down the back stairs of her house in Newmarket. They were buried together in the family plot, along with a sister who had died in early childhood, their mother, their stepmother, and their headless father. Both Lizzie and Emma left their estates to charitable causes, and Lizzie designated $500 for the perpetual care of her father's grave. Bridget Sullivan never worked for any of the Bordens again. After the terrible events of the murder and the trial, she left town. She lived in modest circumstances in Montana until her death in 1948. Those who suggested she had been paid off to keep quiet about the murders could find no evidence of this his illegitimate status and a claim he might make against the estate if his relationship with the Bordens was found out. Allegedly, William was making demands of his father, who was in the process of writing a new will. Andrew rejected the boy, and William became enraged. He first killed Mrs. Borden, and then after hiding in the house with Lizzie's knowledge, killed his father. The conspirators either then paid William off or threatened him, or both, and decided that Lizzie would allow herself to be suspected and tried for the murders, knowing she could always identify the real killer should that be necessary. There's a lot of speculation with this theory, but it's possible, as are so many others. So, who did kill Andrew and Abby Borden? It's really that we'll just never know. It's highly unlikely we will ever discover just what Lizzie and her defense counsel ever knew about the events in 1892. The papers from Lizzie's defense are still locked up and have never been released. The files remain sealed away in the offices of the Springfield, Massachusetts law firm that descended from the firm that defended Lizzie during the trial. There are no plans to ever release them. I am curious to know if they're in this book. I really am. The history of the Lizzie Borden case lingers in our collective imaginations, much like the spirits that are still believed to linger at the former Borden house in Fall River, Massachusetts, which now serves as a bed and breakfast. More than one overnight guest has claimed an encounter with one of the ghosts that remain from the brutal murders. The truth behind such stories remains as elusive as the killer of the Bordens, but the speculation will certainly never end. Thank you guys so much for joining me for Spooktober. As I said, I really enjoyed doing it, and I wish I could post spooky content all year round. But the videos just don't get the views like true crime does, so I will be continuing on the same path I've been continuing on and save the spooky stuff for the month of October. This month was incredibly difficult for me to film. I really tried to get out ahead of myself like I did last year, and it just did not happen. We had just about every technological error that could possibly happen, and then some. But I thank you for indulging me and letting me do the spooky stuff. I know some of you guys really dig it, and as y'all know, I really do too. So, if you're interested in learning about the trial of Lizzie Borden, please join me over on Patreon. You can join, sorry, I thought something was on the ceiling. You can join us there for as low as $2 a month. I post at least one video a week over there, except this month because I've been kind of busy on the regular channel. I will be alternating between reading this book and doing true crime cases, unless we find this incredibly boring, and then I'll do something else. I also bought the Making the Murderer Ted Bundy one too, so that is an option. If we don't like this one, I will definitely be putting it to a vote if I find myself bored with it. I hope that it is so enjoyable that I have a hard time. My watch just told me I hit 5,000 steps, and I've definitely not been walking. Whatever, it was a slow day. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate each and